The US is preparing to announce a slew of sanctions against Russia later this week. That's over the death of Vladimir Putin's most fierce critic, Alexei Navalny. American officials haven't detailed what form these sanctions will take, but there's one man who's leading the charge for specific action to be taken here. Bill Browder is a financier, a political activist, and he's been targeted by the Kremlin since he was deported from Russia nearly 2 decades ago. He's previously campaigned quite successfully for sanctions against Russian human rights abuses, calling on Western countries to introduce the Magnitsky Act. We have it here now in Australia. And the Magnitsky Act was named after his former lawyer died suspiciously in a Russian prison. Now he wants a Navalny Act to, quote, hit Putin where it hurts. And Bill Browder joins me live now from London. Bill, thanks so much for your time. Why would this Navalny Act be so effective if done right?
Well, so what I'm thinking about is that when the war started, after the war started, about a week afterwards, Western allies froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. That's been held by the Federal Reserve of the United States, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and various other banks. This is Russian government money. Since then, Russia has done about $1 trillion of damage to Ukraine. And so the idea that I have, and I think we need to come up with something that would really hit Putin hard for this assassination, is not just to freeze that money, but to confiscate that money, to give that money to Ukraine for their defense and reconstruction, and to call it the Navalny Act. So Putin understands that his murder of Alexei Navalny cost him $300 billion. That would hit him right between the eyes. That would hit him where it hurts, and that would help Ukraine fight off the Russian military invasion.
Have any of the financial sanctions worked to date, do you think, or it's just not really been touching the sides?
I think the financial sanctions have been quite extraordinary. If you look at what's been done, in addition to these frozen funds, there's been a lot of, all the oligarchs' funds are frozen. The banks in Russia have no access to capital markets. There's technology bans. The planes are making emergency landings because they don't have parts. 1,000 companies have pulled out of Russia. It's a mess over there. The only problem is one thing that hasn't been banned or been sanctioned is Russia's sale of oil to places like India and China and South Africa. And they're making a few $100 billion a year selling oil, and that money is being used to buy artillery and weapons and drones and used to pay for soldiers. And so they're running a wartime economy, huge wartime economy, off the back of their oil sales. And until we stop their oil sales, they'll be able to carry on indefinitely.
The pro-Putin propaganda within Russia is probably the strongest it's ever been, but it hadn't stopped several hundred people in Russia going out to lay floral tributes for Alexei Navalny. There's been a lot of commentary about how Navalny's legacy is as much a threat to Putin in death as he was in life. Why was the Navalny myth? Why is the Navalny legacy such a threat to Putin in your view?
Well, because Alexei Navalny had a vision, and it was a very simple one, which is that Russia shouldn't be a corrupt country, that 1,000 people shouldn't be buying jets and yachts and villas and stealing all the money from the people and having everyone else live in abject poverty where there's no medicine and schools and roads and so on. And that really was something that everybody felt could get their heads around in Russia. That's like the main problem in Russia. Yeah. And so here you had this hopeful young guy, freedom, democracy, and no corruption. That's a very attractive proposition for Russian people.
And what about Yulia? Is she as formidable?
Well, in a certain way, she's more formidable because, I mean, she has all the same views as her late husband, but she's also a widow who's fighting the injustice of the little old man who murdered her husband. And that's a very powerful and persuasive proposition for people. And I think that people will be very attracted to it. And I know that when I see her speaking, I can feel her rage and I can sympathize with it. And I think most people can too.
The word hero is thrown around too much these days, but I think when you put the word hero before Alexei Navalny's name, it's probably the most fitting adage that I've seen in quite some time. I want to end, Bill, by asking you about Putin. I mean, and particularly Tucker Carlson and his interview, there's been some commentary around Tucker Carlson doing a lot of damage and allowing Putin to have this megaphone and platform. What is your view on that?
Well, I stayed up. It was running at 11. It started at 11 p.m. London time on the night that they did it,
Yeah.
and I was waiting for some kind of deeply disastrous propaganda exercise, and it was the boringest thing I've ever seen. Putin went into this 2-hour monologue, droning on about some weird fantasy about 1,000 years ago in Russia.
Yeah.
I couldn't follow it, and it was hard to stay awake. I mean, and I'm a guy who spends every minute analyzing Russia. It was a complete flop. And whatever Tucker Carlson, whatever his fantasy about supporting his far right wing conspiracy theories that Putin was going to say, Putin went off script completely and just went into this complete idiocy that nobody could follow and nobody cares about. And he claims he's got 100 million views. Well, I don't know a single person that watched that thing from start to finish because it was just ridiculous.